Yes, question.
You had asked a while back what it was that made blood plasma yellowish color. I was wondering if that was your
Say it again.
You had asked what it was that made blood plasma yellowish.
Yes.
If that was urea.
Actually, it's bilirubin. It's one of the derivatives of what ends up being waste product. Okay, and sometimes, and what is bilirubin from? You've heard that word before. Breakdown of old red blood cells and some of the components of old red blood cells. Whose job is that? Liver has a big role to play in that. So sometimes when we can't convert some of those waste products, that builds up in the blood plasma, and it's a yellowish color. Okay? And then we can actually see it in patients that have problems with processing in the liver for whatever reason. When it starts to build up in blood plasma, you can actually see it in the skin. Because remember, hemoglobin in blood actually gives you some of the coloration on your skin as well. So you get a yellowish tinge to the skin and sometimes even the eye, the whites of the eye from that buildup of waste product. Okay? Whose cells? Granule cells. They produce. Yeah. Mechanoreceptors. What are mechanoreceptors? Think back to nervous system. Yeah. So stretch receptor, some sort of mechanical stimulus is going to fire those guys up. Okay, as opposed to a chemoreceptor that's going to be fired off by some sort of chemical change, whether it be a hormone or change in ion balance, for example. Did that answer your question? Those are questions from what? Lab? So the text. What does aldosterone do? Let's go back to our aldosterone is part of the what? Is it there? Yeah. Okay, part of the what? Pathway of what? When aldosterone's in that, but what is this whole kind of diagram showing us a pathway of? A pathway of the renin-angiotensin pathway, which basically is going to give us an end product of what? Why does that pathway kick in? Yeah, to help regulate blood pressure. Because systemic blood pressure is doing what? Going down. So we need to bring it up. So how are we going to do that with respect to the renal system? How do we really quickly increase blood pressure with respect to the renal system? We increase the amount of water reabsorption back into the circulatory system. Yes? So what's aldosterone's role in that process? And it affects who? It affects the kidney tubules, and it's going to cause the cells of the kidney tubules to do what? Increase reabsorption of sodium back into where? When I say reabsorption with respect to this whole process, back into the circulatory system. So it's going to cause those cells to bring and transfer through active transport more sodium back into the circulatory system. Think of the nephron and all those little capillaries that are around it, peritubular capillaries. So aldosterone is going to affect those cells by causing it to increase the reabsorption back into the circulatory system of sodium. Who's going to follow sodium? Water. And that's going to result in an increase of blood volume due to an increased amount of liquids going back into the circulatory system. And that's going to result in, what's the pink box at the bottom? An increase in systemic blood pressure. Did that hopefully? Yeah? Okay. So think about what has to happen and when these guys come into play. So what do they do to change the results? Okay? And that's how you should kind of try to read these. Who affects what? Okay. Yeah. And you weren't sure what aldosterone did. So that's what it does. And who's gonna cause aldosterone to be secreted? Yeah, the renin and angiotensin cascade. Well, that's how all these hormones kind of work together to solve a problem. Okay? Don't forget, angiotensin plays a role in vaso what? Exactly, which is also going to help do what? Exactly. Okay? So when you look at these diagrams, look at the arrows and how everybody connects to each other and try to explain that to yourself. And that will help you study. Okay? So a diagram like this, there's a lot of concepts packed into that diagram. When you look at it, you should be able to understand what's going on. Talk yourself through it. Walk yourself through it. Say it out loud. People think you're talking to yourself, but that's okay. We don't care, right? He already knows you're crazy, right? Any other questions so far? Everybody understand the whole concept of active and passive transport in the whole absorption or reabsorption process? How osmolality changes because of increase and decrease in dissolved substances in certain portions of the kidney, and what happens in the proximal convoluted tubules. Yeah, most everything gets sucked back into the circulatory system. And then we kind of fine-tune things in the descending loop of Henle, in the ascending loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubules. So that by the time things hit the collecting duct, what's left? What's left in the what waste, or what else can we call what's left in the, exactly, urine. That's what's left in the collecting duct. So once we've gone, so everybody good to there? Okay, we're filtering out waste and excess water and excess hydrogen ions. That's what the kidney's job is. And in doing that, we're going to help regulate a whole bunch of other things, like fluid compartments in the body, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter, blood pressure, okay? So once we have urine, and that's where we are now, where does it go? So now we have to get it out, because now it's waste. We want to remove it. We want to get it out. It's all going to collect and flow down the pyramids from the minor calyxes to the major calyxes to the renal pelvis, which is then going to dump into the ureters. So we see the ureters here and the renal pelvis in this X-ray, which is kind of cool, that dumps into the holding tank. You are constantly making urine, 24/7, yes? But you're lucky. You have a holding tank. Otherwise, you would be peeing 24 hours a day. Would not be convenient, right? So you have a holding tank, and that's what we're going to talk about next as far as urinary anatomy goes. And that's your urinary bladder. Then, how do we get rid of from the body that urine? Out another tube called the urethra. So, before I get too far and talk about urine itself, I want to talk about something called renal clearance, which we kind of touched on in the last lecture, but I want to emphasize it again today. Your body should be able to get rid of certain products in a certain amount of time when your kidneys are functioning properly. And that's what they talk about when they talk about renal clearance. Refers to the volume of plasma that is cleared of particle substances or particular substances in a given time, usually a minute. So it's a calculation we do for different substances. It's based on the concentration of the substance in the urine versus the flow rate of urine formation. How much do I give per minute? And then the concentration of that same substance in the plasma. Now, one of the ones that we do a lot in the clinical lab, Al, tell me, which one do we look at? Oh, Al! How do we evaluate renal clearance in the clinical lab? What substance do we use? I'm putting you on the spot. Or you have to do it in chemistry too. You ever get one of the jugs, Al? Yeah. What are we measuring? Creatinine clearance! Very good. That's what I wanted, Al. See, he's awake. So, one of the substances that you clear on a regular basis in your urine, a waste product, is something called creatinine. And that's a nice one because it's really easy to measure in the clinical lab. So, if I'm trying to evaluate kidney function in a patient, what I can do is a wonderful test called a 24-hour creatinine clearance evaluation. And what are the substances I'm going to need to figure out, based on what I just told you, what's the information I'm going to need? Well, one, I'm going to need to know how much urine a patient puts out per minute. How can I do that? That's a tough one. Do I have to have them pee every minute in a cup? No. How else could I do it? Yeah. So if I take a period of time and divide it by how many minutes there are in that period of time, I can get the same answer. Yes? So if I collect urine from a patient for 24 hours, and what do you have to do if you've ever had to do this? You have to pee in a container for 24 hours and make sure you put it in the fridge or else it gets real stinky, and make sure the kids don't drink it because it's not juice. Right? Then I can figure that out. So I collect urine for 24 hours. The other piece of information I need to evaluate renal clearance is I have to find out how much creatinine, the substance I'm looking at, is in that urine in that 24-hour period. So that can give me what? Concentration of substance in the urine, milligrams per milliliter. So now by collecting that 24-hour urine, I can tell how much is in the urine. I can tell how much urine formation occurs in my patients by doing a little math. So how many minutes are there in 24 hours? You do the math. That will give you the mLs, depending on the total volume in your urine collection when they bring in their jug or jugs, because some people pee a lot. And then what else do I need for this evaluation? I also have to know what the concentration of creatinine is in blood plasma. So what do I have to do to my patient? I have to draw some blood and do a chemical analysis of how much creatinine is in that blood. And then I can evaluate based on knowledge of how long it takes for creatinine to be cleared through someone's system in 24 hours, because we've done a lot of research on that stuff, whether or not kidney function is normal in my patients. There's some other substances that you can actually inject into patients and do the same thing. So if I inject a certain amount of substance, and one of the popular ones, I never actually did that evaluation myself, but it's talked about in anatomy books. It's called inulin. Not insulin, inulin. And I can inject a certain amount into my patient and again do the same sorts of measurements. See how long it takes for a patient to clear that amount of inulin that was injected into them. And again, that can measure how efficient our kidneys are at clearing substances from blood plasma. And that's what renal clearance results give us. Now, what if I can't clear substances in a respectful amount of time? Would that be a problem for the rest of the systems in the body? What if I cannot put out the trash? Let's equate it to something else. Do you remember when there was, a few years back in some big cities, a big trash, what's the word I want? Strike, thank you, that's the word I want. Big strike. Trash was building up all over the place. Was that a problem? Why? What do we get an increase of when we can't put out the trash? When it builds up? Toxics? Yeah, kind of stinky. Stinky because of buildup of what? Toxins. Mess my pH up. Can that hurt some systems physically because of chemistry imbalance in the body? So when my kidneys can't clear these substances at a decent rate, I'm going to have problems with all the rest of my systems in the body. And again, think of you in a room never being able to put out your trash. Okay? Because that's what your renal system is doing, getting rid of the trash. So renal failure is a problem. Yes? I have a problem putting out the trash, getting rid of waste products, balancing my pH. And what else do I have a problem balancing? Pressure in the system, water balance in the system. So, is that a problem? Less than 15 mils per minute. Filtrate formation ceases or stops completely is the definition of renal failure. So my glomerular filtration rate, that's what GFR stands for, is way too low. So I can't put out the trash. So what do we have to do for patients that can't put out the trash? We have to try to get the trash out for them. And that's what a process called hemodialysis is. So we use a lot of the principles that we discussed of osmosis and diffusion and hemodynamics and hydrostatic pressure, all those things we just talked about, we use those same principles in a machine. So we're going to pass the patient's blood volume through that machine using these principles and pulling out what? Taking out the trash, exactly. Getting rid of those waste products that the kidneys would normally do when their function is optimal, when they are functioning properly. So we can run blood volume through a machine and do the same thing. And they have to have it done. Anybody know anybody on dialysis? It's at least a couple times a week, depending on the patient's renal function. Because some people are on dialysis that still have a little bit of renal function as well. So it depends on the severity of the patient's kidney failure. So we have to clean the blood out for them, and that's what hemodialysis is. And they talk about that in the textbook as well. So next, urine. So urine. The components of urine, believe it or not, can tell a clinician a lot about what's going on with you. So what's that test called, Al, that we do on that urine? Urine. Pee in the cup for the doctor. What am I going to do? Yeah, you got it. It's called a urinalysis. Analysis of your urine. So what am I looking for? Well, first of all, believe it or not, physical characteristics. I look at it. That's actually part of the report. What should it look like? What should normal urine look like? Pale yellow. And what's the yellow from? Yeah, urea and some of the waste products. So it should be pale yellow. Should it be cloudy? No, because there shouldn't be any chunks in your urine. It should be what? Clear. So, color and transparency is actually looked at. They call it urochrome. Pale yellow. It should, how about odor? It should be, according to the textbook, slightly aromatic. So it shouldn't be really stinky. It should have a slight, oh, somebody peed odor, but not really, really bad. Some drugs cause odors to occur. Some vegetables. Who's a lover of the asparagus? Yeah. You have really stinky pee after you eat asparagus. And again, it's metabolite of that particular vegetable. It's not bad, but it is going to change the odor of your urine. pH. pH is a tough one because it's a huge range. Tends to be normally slightly acidic or on the acid side. And why do you think it's on the acidic side? Not necessarily. Remember, what was the kidney's job? Yeah, it might be getting rid of excess what? Hydrogen ions. And of course, those are going to be in that solution and make that a solution more acidic. But it can be, according to the textbook, about 4.5 to 8, which is a huge range. So it can be acidic, it can be basic. If it's too basic, we might have a problem. And it might be the metabolite of some nasty little critter that might give us a problem in the urinary system. Anybody know? Bacteria. Sometimes with bacterial infections, actually most of the time with bacterial infections, your urine is too basic. Because one of the byproducts of those nasty little critters is ammonia, which can also change the odor of your urine. So if you've ever had a urinary tract infection, you have stinky urine. The amount of dissolved substances in the liquid is also measured in a urinalysis, and that's called your specific gravity. Remember, we don't want it to be too concentrated, do we? It's more concentrated when I'm what? You do that on purpose. You slow down urine production. Well, you actually slow down the amount of water that goes into urine, and we talked about that last lecture. When you sleep, so you don't produce as much volume, so you don't have to keep getting up in the middle of the night. That'll change when you get older. So in the morning, that first void, or what do we call urination? There's another word for it, begins with an M. Micturition. That is a concentrated urine. But then the rest of the day, you should have a normal concentration of dissolved substances or specific gravity in your urine. So that is 1.001 to 1.035, depending on its solute concentration. If we start to see patients having a very high specific gravity, what does that tell us about what's going on with that patient? Give me an example of a patient who might have a high specific gravity. Probably not. If I have an increased amount of dissolved substances in my urine, what do I have a decreased amount of? Water. Ah, that's what I was looking for. What if I'm dehydrated? And there could be many reasons why one might be dehydrated, but that might increase the specific gravity of my urine. So, chemical composition is another thing we look at. Nitrogenous wastes. Again, those are some of the waste products that I get rid of, are what we're going to find in there. Uric acid, creatinine, remember, that's something we talked about earlier. Urea. Most of my urine is what? Water, 95%. So 5% solutes include some of these guys in the list. I'm also going to get rid of some ions like sodium and potassium and phosphorus and sulfur, creatinine, magnesium, bicarbonate, calcium. Not tons, but those are going to be in there as well. That bile pigment from the bilirubin breakdown, that's going to give me the yellow stuff. If there's too much of any of these, there might be a problem, either with the chemistry of the body or problems with kidney function. Should I find things like glucose in my urine? No, because what should I have done with the glucose I sucked out in the glomerular capsule? Suck it back in the proximal convoluted tubules. But what if I have way too much glucose and I don't have time to suck it all back in the proximal convoluted tubules? Might some be in my urine? Yes. So that's an indication of a problem in my patient. A problem with too much what? Too much glucose in my blood plasma. So we might see it spill out into urine. Proteins, should those be in my urine? No. So I have problems with something going on if I start to see protein in my urine. Ketone bodies. Byproduct of metabolism of lipids at too fast a rate. Is that normal in my urine? No. It means I have too much where? If it's in my urine, I have too much where? In my blood plasma. That's going to start messing with my what? pH. Acidosis. Should there be hemoglobin in my urine? No. If there is, there might be an indication that you might have had some red blood cells in your urine. And because urine is probably a hypotonic solution, what might have happened to those red blood cells once they became in your urine where they shouldn't be? They blow up. So what's left? We don't see cells, but we pick up chemically hemoglobin. There's a problem there. We shouldn't have red blood cells in our urine, so something's going on. Correct. Why? Correct. Correct. Yep. So that's actually a contaminant of your urine. Because it's not really coming from your urine, is it? No. Right. So we'll see that sometimes, and that's what we have to keep in mind when we do a urinalysis. Bile pigments. Again, too much, not good. Problems with the liver, problems with cirrhosis, problems with obstruction of bile ducts might be an issue. If I see cells, erythrocytes or leukocytes, what's a leukocyte? White blood cell. Is that a problem? Yes. Why might there be white blood cells in my urine? Yeah, there might be something those white blood cells are after, like maybe a bacterial infection. Okay? So all of these things can be looked at in your urine. So when you're asked to pee in the cup, that's going to give your doctor quite a bit of information. So understand normal and abnormal urinary constituents and chemical composition. What's a ureter? The tube that dumps out of the what? What's this? That's a cross-section of the ureter. What lines the ureters? Lumen. Transitional epithelial cells. Very good. Transitional epithelial cells. We know what those are from Chapter 4 last semester, right? Where do we find transitional epithelial cells? Typically lining something that does what? Does that stretch? Yeah, when urine is dumping down it. So we see the composition, tissue composition of the ureter wall. And that is going to dump down into who? That's going to dump down into the urinary bladder. They also mentioned something under homeostatic imbalances that we should probably mention as well. Something called renal calculi. Has anybody ever experienced these wonderful little things? Oh, they're great, aren't they? Yeah, what are they? They're big rocks in these tubes. And we call them kidney stones, but they're rocks. They're rocks that form from what? Crystallization of some of these substances. Now, if I don't have the proper water balance as I'm forming urine, anybody ever make rock candy? This is how I'll give you an example. How do you make rock candy, do you know? You get a whole bunch of sugar. Not just a couple of teaspoons of sugar in water, because that wouldn't do it, would it? So you get a whole bunch, very concentrated amount of dissolved substances. See where this is going? And you put it in solution. Sometimes you have to do what to it to get it all in the solution? Well, you can stir it, but sometimes that doesn't work. What do you have to do? Put it on the stove and warm it up so it can get it all in solution. But as it starts to cool, after it leaves that nice little cocoon of the kidney and starts to cool, it might form what? Crystals, rocks. So what do you do when you make the rock candy? You dissolve all that sugar in that fluid, and then you take these little strings and you hang them down into the solution. You've never made rock candy before? Well, now I'm telling you how to do it. Go do it. So you hang strings down into that solution and you put it aside someplace and you let it do what? You let it cool, and what happens? Those dissolved substances, in the case of your rock candy, sugar, but in your urine, what might some of those way too many dissolved substances be? Calcium, some of those ions we talked about, phosphorus, magnesium. If they're too concentrated, they can form crystals. And that's what renal calculi is. So how do I get rid of a renal calculi? That rock has to then pass through all of my tubes and scrape all of my tubes as it goes. And if the rock is too big for you to pass through all of your tubes, yeah, you might have to go and have it removed. Or we have a process where we send in some high frequency sound waves to do what? Break it up into smaller pieces so it can pass through all of my tubes. Painful? Yeah. Yep. Sometimes people refer to it as worse than childbirth. And that's usually a man that says that because they've never given birth. But it's very painful. Painful? Yes. So how can we possibly avoid the formation of renal calculi? Well, if the renal calculi is composed of a certain thing, like for example calcium, and you are a big cheese and ice cream fan, what might your doctor tell you to stop doing? Eating too much cheese and ice cream. That might help. What's the other thing that might help? And this is something that many of us, especially when we're busy and we're studying and we have kids to take care of, we don't do enough of this. Water. Water. Not energy drinks, not coffee, not tea, water. Because that's going to help do what? Yeah, dissolve everything properly so it doesn't do what? Crystallize. So back to your making your rock candy. If you put too much water and not enough sugar in there, are you going to get anything? No. So that's something that can help. Probably. Protein concentration can also lead to solutions that are too high in dissolved substance concentration too. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of things wrong with that diet. What, the rocks?
No, because they asked my house, because my husband had a kidney stone years back, and they're not operating it because it's small enough for pressure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So when he finds that stone, he has to put it in the urinary.
And they actually analyze its composition.
And then
They can.
tell him what
Right. So if it's mainly composed of calcium, again, that's just an example, and you tend to eat too many things with calcium in them, then you have to watch that in your diet. So yeah, they actually do a chemical composition on the stones or the sand that you pass to help. Yeah, different colors depending on the minerals that compose it. So yeah, it can be different colors. So what's this? Up at the top is a urinary bladder. This is the urinary bladder of who? A male. Males and females, a little bit different a setup. Males and females, as far as openings into the lower pelvic region, males have how many openings? One. So we have to share. So reproductive and renal system share the exit point of both urine and sperm in the males. So we see the male's urethra is much longer because of that fact. Also, the urethra is going to pass through some glands that are also responsible for helping to form semen. Prostate. We see that there as well. So, in the discussion of the urinary bladder, they talk about the fact that this is a very muscular region, also lined with transitional epithelial cells. Why? Exactly. It's your holding tank. So, it's going to fill and stretch, and that stretch reflex is going to tell us when it's time to do what? Empty the tank. And who's going to keep everything in the tank before it's time to empty? Sphincter muscles. Very good. So we have pathways that are myelinated as we age that will help give us control of sphincter muscles that are going to control the holding tank, the bladder, and the bladder volume. When do you have control over that volume? Or control over what's in the holding tank? Are you born with that right away? No. How long does it take for you to gain control? Yeah, 2 to 3 years. What has to happen before you gain control over those sphincter muscles? Axon myelination, exactly. So, those of you parents who want to try to potty train those children too early, it's not going to happen until that process is done. No matter how many Cheerios you put in the toilet or how many videos you watch, that's not going to happen until that myelination process is done. So be aware of that. Same thing with the sphincter muscles that control the other end that we discussed in the digestive system. deep sleep usually. Not necessarily control, but they might actually be too deep asleep is usually one of the biggest problems. They might have problems with control of sphincter muscles as well. So there's many different reasons why. No, it depends. Not when they're adult. Typically by the time adulthood, and I can't say that that's the case because there's probably some cases of adult bedwetting out there as well. But it depends on the age of the child and when that whole myelination process takes place and how efficient they are at controlling that or being aware of that during their sleep cycle. It can happen for a short period of time. It can happen for a long period of time. It depends on the child. So it's tough. But it's normal. So you shouldn't panic too much. There may be some problems with the renal system, but a lot of times the children will grow out of that. You just have to be patient. And they sell products to take care of that. Use them. Yes? It's much less embarrassing to a child to have to get rid of a product than to have to change a whole bed. Yes? Keep that in mind, my friends. So, male, female, a little bit different with respect to urethra. Urethra much longer because it's a shared exit in the male with the reproductive system, and sometimes the renal system can be affected if the reproductive system is affected. So if, for example, prostate is enlarged, there can be problems with urination in males. And you can see just the way it's set up, how it makes sense that that might happen. So sometimes prostate issues can result in issues with voiding and micturition in males as well. The very long urethra also allows males a convenience as well. Males tend to have much fewer frequency of urinary tract infection. Now, female, very different, much shorter urethra because we have a separate entrance to our reproductive system, so we don't have to share with anybody. But that short urethra gives us a much smaller region for urine leaving the body. Yes? So sometimes, and some of us women who have experienced this after childbirth, the whole sphincter muscle thing, that trapdoor doesn't work as efficiently as it should. A cough or a good laugh can cause some problems. Yes? Because of that short passageway. So sometimes muscles get weakened, especially after childbirth or childbearing years. As we get older, sometimes our muscles aren't as strong as they used to be. So with age, we also see problems with that sphincter muscle as well. And that's called the trigone region. We can exercise those, you know, and get them stronger. What are those exercises called, ladies? They're called Kegels, and men, you can do it too. So if you have a problem with the sneeze and the drip, you can also do those exercises to increase strength in that muscle region. Those are muscles, those are skeletal muscles. So that can help as well. And sometimes surgeries have to be performed to help strengthen those regions if the problem continues. So that is the urethra of the female. One of the things that can help prevent frequent urinary tract infections, especially in females, do you know? Pee. And so many women, and you know who you are guilty of this. I'll pee later. And you kind of lose that signal, and you're going to stretch your bladder even further. Well, while you're doing that, because we have such a short entrance, nasty little bacteria that are hanging out here can do what? Migrate up. So when we urinate, what do? flush them out. So don't hold your urine, ladies. Whatever it is, that can wait. Go pee. Especially if you have a problem with increased urinary tract infections. A couple of things you have to do. 1, drink more water. 2, maybe you need to acidify your urine a little bit, because that is also non-conducive to bacterial growth. What's something that might acidify your urine a little bit? One of the popular remedies is cranberry juice. Well, you know what? That actually works. But it doesn't have to be cranberry juice. Anything that is higher in acid concentration, you're going to get rid of those excess hydrogen ions in your urine. So they actually sell, because some people will drink tons and tons of cranberry juice. Don't get carried away. Ocean Spray is happy about that, but you can also take some pills that have a higher concentration of those same substances and not have to drink 700 calories worth of cranberry juice a day to keep that under control. But urinating frequently. When you get the urge, go urinate. And then increase those fluids and hydrogen ion concentration in your diet. So that's the urethra. Micturition is talked about next. And that is a fancy way of saying what? Urination. So we get messages, and we have control over sphincter muscles with the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Somatic, motor, nerve activity. So higher brain centers are going to help stop micturition. Could you have control over that too? Girls, when you get that urge, what do? You hold it, yes? So you have the ability to control that, because what kind of muscle is that sphincter muscle? It's voluntary. What kind of muscle is voluntary? Skeletal muscle, exactly. So this diagram shows us some of the different aspects of the micturition reflex and some of the different divisions of the autonomic nervous system that are responsible for the reflex itself. So sympathetic and parasympathetic, depending on what I need to do, are going to control that sphincter muscle for micturition. Now, under homeostatic imbalances, we talk about some problems either with this whole nervous pathway or the fact that this pathway has not been myelinated. So after the toddler years, incontinence is what we call it, is usually the result of either emotional or physical pressure during pregnancy and other things listed there as well. Urinary retention is when I can't do what? Control that muscle to empty that bladder. Is that a problem? Yeah. It's like putting way too much water in the swimming pool. What's going to happen if you don't empty the bladder? You're going to still keep making urine. It's going to still keep filling up, and that can rupture. So we have to try to remove that urine with catheterization so that we can relieve the pressure in the bladder. And that can be due to many different things. It can be due to trauma, for example, or it can be due to chemical imbalances in the body, or sometimes after major operations, patients have trouble controlling that sphincter muscle and some of the nervous system pathways discussed here. So they may be disrupted for short periods of time, and catheterization is necessary to empty the bladder. Developmental aspects, don't worry about it, and that's the end of chapter 25. So who's ready for a clicker quiz? Don't have your clicker? Bummer. Which of the following is not a function of the kidneys? A, bile production. B, excretion of excess ions. C, release of erythropoietin. Or D, activation of vitamin D. Did everybody click? If you have a clicker? It's dead. That means you have no clicker. Take the battery out and see if it, and stick it back in. Sometimes it wakes up. No, it's dead. Bummer. Oh, is that you? Okay, so our number's 32. Are we done? Everybody clicked? Who can click? What's the answer? A, bile production. Who takes care of that? The liver. Urine collection comes together in the blank of the kidney. In the blank of the kidney. A, cortex. B, medulla. C, columns. D, pelvis. So urine comes together in what part of the kidney? That's my hint. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's the answer? The renal what? Pelvis. D. Does everybody understand that? Remember, think of the kidney. We have the cortex. We have the medulla. In the medulla, those pyramids are going to form collecting ducts, and where are they all going to dump into? The renal pelvis. Urine's going to collect and then come down the ureters. What? Oh, you have batteries? Does anybody want to borrow batteries from a classmate? Quick, run down. So you owe her batteries. All right, next question. The blood filtering structure of the kidney. The blood filtering structure of the kidney is called the A, glomerular capsule. B, renal tubule. C, glomerulus. D, pelvis. All right, what's the answer? Oh, 33 now. Oh, because your batteries are working. There you go. What's the answer? C is the answer. Glomerulus. The capsule is outside that, and that's where the urine starts. It travels through the nephron. So C is the answer. Next question. The urine-forming units of the kidney are these are the urine-forming units. A, glomerular capsules. B, renal tubules. C, glomeruli, or D, the nephrons? All right, what's the answer? D, the nephrons. Very good. So it's the nephron. Those are the whole units that form our end product, urine. Yes? Because we have to do the whole reabsorption, secretion, water balance thing before we form the end product, urine. So the nephron, the whole thing, is responsible for urine formation. Make sense? So D is the answer. Next question, which of the following factors contributes to the higher filtration rate in the glomerular capillaries compared to other capillary beds? A, the glomerular capillaries are fenestrated. D, the diameter of the efferent arteriole is smaller than the diameter of the afferent arteriole. C, the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule is very porous. Or D, all of the above contribute. Five, 4, 3. Ooh. I love doing that. What's the answer? D. So if you know there's 2 in there, and again, it's a multiple choice question, so you know for sure it's 2 of them, then if there's an all of the above, it's got to be that choice. Okay, next question. Which of the following substances would not, N-O-T, not be found in normal filtrate? A, uric acid. B, urea. C, proteins. D, creatinine. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's the answer? C, proteins. Remember, we don't want to find proteins in normal urine. If we find proteins, there's a problem. So C is the answer. You guys getting this right up there? All right. Future student. All right, next. Which of the following general functions can be assigned to the renin-angiotensin system? Remember, what was that for? Why did renin and angiotensin kick in? A, water conservation. B, blood pressure elevation. C, lowering blood sodium levels. Or D, both A and B. All right, 5, 4. There we go. All right, what's the answer? The answer is D. So, if I lower blood sodium, I'm also lowering the amount of what? Yeah. So that's the one that doesn't fit. So water conservation and blood pressure elevation, because if I put more water in there, what's it going to do to blood pressure? Bring it up. So D is the answer. Of the filtered solutes, what percentage is reabsorbed by the renal tubules? A, 1%. B, 50%. C, 99%. Or D, none. So when I suck everything out in the glomerulus, what percentage is reabsorbed by the renal tubules? Five, 4, 3, take a guess. Press a button. 2. There we go. What's the answer? Ooh, C. So most of everything I sucked out of the glomerulus, between its travels around the peritubular capillaries and through the proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule, and loop of Henle, 99% of that stuff goes back into circulation. So C is the answer. Want to do one more? All right. Why? Nobody answered. Why is glucose in the urine an indicator of diabetes mellitus? A, when glucose is very high, the filtered glucose occupies all the transport carriers and is no longer reabsorbed. B, because diabetics cannot regulate their glucose. C, when blood glucose is low, it is excreted into the urine. Or D, because diabetics have high levels of glucagon. Five, 4, 3. Oh. Oops, I prematurely stopped. What's the answer? A. A is the answer. All right, I'll give you one more. All right, drinking too much alcohol results in a headache the next day. Why does that happen? A, alcohol stimulates pain receptors in the brain? Nope. B, I'll give the answer to that one. That was no. B, alcohol stimulates sodium reabsorption? C, alcohol stimulates aldosterone secretion? Or D, alcohol inhibits ADH secretion? I'm not telling you yet. 5, 4, 3. What's the answer? D. It's not A. Oh, good. Nobody picked A. Okay? So, that is the end of the wonderful chapter. Everybody good? You ready for the next chapter? I still got a half an hour, and you know me, I like to talk. So are there any questions? I'm thinking I'm sick of correcting quizzes. Are you sick of taking them? Huh? Do you want one more? Okay, take a vote. Who doesn't want any more quizzes? Oh, that looks like the majority to me. Who wants one more quiz? Oh, yeah, you guys lose. Yes. So, no, Al. Only one. Come on, I got to correct him. Give me a break. All right, so this chapter is entitled Fluid, Electrolyte, and Acid-Base Balance. And we kind of already talked about that in the previous chapter. So what we're basically going to go over in this chapter is a lot of stuff you already know. Therefore, I'm going to go through this chapter very quickly. Yes? Not in a half an hour. I'm good, but I'm not that good. We'll finish it up and start the next chapter next class for sure. Okay, so the first thing the book introduces is where fluids are kept in the body. These are our body fluid compartments. Most of the fluid in our bodies, and we have quite a bit of fluid in our bodies. Volume equals about how much in this person's body? About 60% of your total body weight is fluid. About 40 liters in whoever this is. Fluid. So we have to make sure we put it in places where it belongs. And why is that fluid so important? What takes place in that fluid that's so important for living organisms? Exchange. Give me a more scientific word, maybe something you get scared of when you hear. Chemistry. Exactly. So these fluid compartments and the amount of fluid in these compartments is crucial to proper chemistry. Chemistry is crucial to proper body function. Yes? So where is most of the fluid in our bodies? Where is that? Inside what? Your cells. Intracellular fluid, ICF. About, in this person, 25 liters. 40% of your total body weight is fluid inside your cells. Yes? The rest of that fluid that's not inside your cells is outside your cells. And what do we call that? Extracellular fluid. Now, I put that fluid in a couple of different places. A lot of that fluid is going to be in spaces around tissues. Give me an example of some interstitial fluid. Serous fluid, pericardial fluid, abdominal pelvic, what do we call that stuff? Peritoneal fluid. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Stuff around the heart, pericardial. Stuff around the lungs, pleural. That is interstitial fluid. So, and this, I hate this diagram because then they throw the 80% number in there and it makes you think that, well, 80% of all the, no, 80% of what? Of the extracellular fluid. So, most of the extracellular fluid is in interstitial spaces. And then where's the rest of it? Floating around in the circulatory system. We call that blood plasma. So, most of it is made of what? Water. So most of these fluids that we're going to talk about is composed of water. But don't forget, other ions are also going to affect the movement of things from one place to another. Concentration of ions. We talked about that when we talked about the renal system, right? What was it, if I wanted to move water around, what did I have to manipulate? Sodium or ion concentration. So, the concentration in these fluid compartments of different ions is going to help with the movement of substances across plasma membranes and from one place to another to help with chemistry. So the composition of body fluids is what the book talks about next. Electrolyte composition in blood plasma, interstitial fluid, and intracellular fluid is what this diagram is showing us. So, when we talked about the nervous system, one of the ions that we talked about was this guy. Who's that? Sodium. And what was so important about sodium? Not with respect to nerve impulse. Think about nervous system. Think about action potential. Think about depolarization and repolarization. Switch out of the kidneys. Go into the nervous system. So that ion concentration was going to help regulate what? All the things I just said. Nerve impulses, right? Remember when we had neurotransmitters that opened up proteins that helped regulate sodium concentration inside and outside cells? Is that ringing a bell? What happened to sodium concentration inside the cell when those receptors opened up? Because look at, under normal conditions, where most of the sodium is. Is it inside cells? No. It's what? Outside cells. And remember, ions want to go with their concentration gradient normally, correct? So what happens if I mess up sodium concentrations? What happens to nerve impulses? Yeah, they either are too strong or they fire off when we don't want them to, if I start messing with stuff inside cells. Or they're not going to take place properly if I start messing with stuff outside cells. You see where we're going with this chapter? So all of the things you've learned in this course are touched upon in this chapter with respect to fluid and electrolyte balance. So what we need to know is where we're going to find highest concentrations of major ones. Sodium, for example. You might see a question for sure on your final test that asks you something about where the highest sodium concentration is, intracellular or extracellular fluid. Potassium, on the other hand, where am I going to find more of that? Inside cells versus outside cells. Why? No, if I have too much potassium in extracellular fluid, it's going to start causing problems with things like nerve impulses. You want to kill somebody really quick? Yeah? What do you think you could do? Give them a bolus of potassium. Boom. Make sure it works out of their system before the medical examiner gets there. I didn't say that. So if you mess with ion balance, you're going to mess with function of different systems. You can mess with muscle contraction. And the heart's kind of a muscle, kind of an important one that we need to contract and relax on a regular basis. So ion concentration is very important. Where am I going to find most of my calcium? There's something missing there. Where's the yellow bar? Where do you think I'm going to find most of my calcium? There's an error here. There's only 2 bars there. Where am I going to find most of my calcium, do you think? The little ones that you see there are short. Intracellular. Magnesium, more intracellular. Bicarbonate ions, more extracellular. What are bicarbonate ions doing for me? Yep, they're helping to regulate body pH. They act as one of our major buffer systems. Chlorine is going to help with things like the chloride shift and oxygen and carbon dioxide transport in the hemoglobin molecule inside red blood cells. And we find most of that in extracellular fluid. What's HPO4? Phosphorus. And that's an intracellular molecule. Again, very important part of our buffer acid-base balance system. What's SO4? Sulfate, also part of our buffer, intracellular buffer system. And then protein anions. What's an anion? This is going back, way back to chapter whatever it was we'd studied when we studied chemistry. Think charge. It's a negatively charged ion. And we're going to find many of those intracellularly. And this guy is a big contributor to what? Oh, you're good. Membrane potential. I'm impressed. Everybody remembers what membrane potential is, right? Membranes are polar at rest. What does that mean? Which side? Correct. Because of that guy. So negatively charged on the inside, positively charged on the outside. Why is it positively charged on the outside? Because of who? That guy, sodium concentration. Yes? So sodium ion concentration is responsible for that positive charge on the outside. Protein anion concentration is responsible for that negative charge on the inside. Yes? So, where these ions hang out and the concentration of these ions has a lot to do with movement of fluids in body compartments. So composition of extracellular and intracellular fluid is what we just talked about. Exchange of gases, nutrients, water, and wastes between the three fluid compartments is what we see here in this diagram. And again, the concentration of ions in those fluid compartments are going to dictate the speed and the amount at which these guys are transferred in these fluid compartments. So fluid movement among the compartment is what is discussed in that chapter, paragraph on page 998. So we already talked about this, didn't we? Why does oxygen leave atmospheric gases and go into capillary beds in the alveoli of the respiratory system? Pressure and concentration. So those two factors are going to drive the movement of oxygen out of the lungs and into the blood plasma. Then, as blood plasma travels through the body, that oxygen, because of pressure and concentration, is going to move into interstitial fluid and then into cells where it's needed. Why do I need oxygen in my cells? Do you know why? Are you just raising your hand? Somebody said it. ATP. What's ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. So I need the oxygen in my cells, and if I mess with the concentration or the pressure, am I going to be able to move it from the lungs and get it into the cells? No. So all of these concentrations must be balanced in order to move things like that. I can go through them all, but you can explain them all, hopefully by looking at this diagram. Yes? Anybody don't understand this diagram? So we talked about the digestive system, we talked about the renal system, and we talked about the movement of ions in the in-fluid compartments with the help of these systems through the body. See, so I told you, you talked about all this stuff already. Water balance and ECF osmolality. What's ECF? Extracellular fluid. What's osmolality? Concentration of what in where? Concentration of dissolved substances in fluid. Okay? So, where do we get water from? That's what this diagram is all about. Well, much of it, on the average daily intake, we drink. 60%, about 1,500 milliliters. Some of the food you eat, unless you eat dehydrated everything, you have water in your foods, correct? 30% we get from our foods, about 750 milliliters. And then reactions of metabolism. Give me an example of a reaction of metabolism that is a byproduct of water. It was on your last test. Cellular respiration. So reactions of metabolism can also give off water as well. About 10% of the water in your fluid compartments, about 250 milliliters on an average daily intake, comes from metabolism. We call that metabolic water. So, what's the average daily output? They should kind of be equal, right? If I input too much and don't output enough, I'm going to mess up my what? I'm going to mess up pressure, I'm going to mess up osmolality, I'm going to mess up the composition of my fluid compartments. So input and output should kind of be equal on a daily basis. So I get rid of some of my water, 4% in my feces through the digestive system. More than that, about twice as much of that, you sweat every day. Do you sweat in the winter? Yes! Smell the armpits of your shirt. And that will be a clue as to whether you sweat in the winter or not. So about 200 milliliters you sweat. 700 milliliters is what we call insensible losses. And it's kind of like a combination of things we lose through the skin and what? Every time you breathe out, what's one of the things you breathe out? Water vapor. If you don't believe me, go breathe on a mirror. You'll fog it up. That's water. Yes? So about 700 milliliters is lost there. And then most of what you lose is going to come out, 60%, about 1,500 milliliters in your urine. So our body systems are responsible for helping to regulate these fluid compartments on a daily basis. And that's where we'll pick up on Thursday. So no quiz. No more quiz